Take the bus. I'm buying your sister a Porsche. She has a real career. Those were my father's words that morning. 3 hours later, he would be standing in front of 500 executives, staring at me from the stage, and the Porsche he'd just bought his favorite daughter would become the most humiliating purchase of his life. My father, Richard Bennett, didn't even look up from his coffee as he slid the leather-bound key fob across the marble kitchen island toward my younger sister, Lauren Bennett. Lauren's face lit up as her manicured fingers snatched the keys off the counter. My name is Olivia Bennett. I am 34 years old, and on the morning of the annual Tri-County Business Awards Gala, an event where I was meant to be celebrated, my own father was trying to strip away my dignity. "Dad, the gala is on the other side of the city," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the sharp ache in my chest. "It's pouring rain outside, and I'm wearing a formal gown." "Then carry an umbrella," Richard scoffed, finally looking at me with cold, dismissive eyes. "Lauren just secured a VP title at my firm. She needs to arrive in a vehicle that reflects our family's executive standard. You've been wasting years running some invisible little startup nobody's ever heard of. I'm not wasting valet space or luxury mileage on a hobby. Take the bus, Olivia. It builds character." Lauren let out a soft, condescending chuckle, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "Don't be dramatic, Olivia. Public transit isn't that bad. Besides, Dad's right. Tonight is about real corporate success. You should just be glad we let you tag along to see how actual business gets done." I looked at my father's rigid expression, then at Lauren's gloating smile. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. Instead, I quietly smoothed down the fabric of my gown, picked up my clutch, and walked out into the rain. The cold morning rain soaked the hem of my floor-length gown the moment I stepped off the curb. Water pooled in my heels as I stood under the rusted shelter of the bus stop, surrounded by commuters in raincoats who stared at my formal attire. I paid my fare with exact change, found a seat near the back, and smoothed the wet fabric over my knees as the heavy bus lurched forward into city traffic. Sitting on that rattling transit bus, surrounded by foggy windows and the smell of wet exhaust, my mind drifted back over the last decade. Ever since our mother passed away, Richard had treated family dynamics like a corporate hierarchy. Lauren was his chosen successor, groomed, praised, and handed every shortcut within his legacy manufacturing firm. I was the disappointed afterthought simply because I refused to sit behind a desk at his company. When I launched my own enterprise 6 years ago, Richard dismissed it as a pathetic cry for attention, entirely convinced I was drowning in debt. He had no idea what I was actually doing behind the scenes. My phone vibrated inside my clutch. One message appeared from my executive assistant. "The transaction closed at 8 a.m. Everything is ready for tonight." I stared at the screen for a moment, then locked my phone. My father thought I was going to the gala as an unwanted guest. He had no idea why the organizers had reserved a private room for me backstage. By the time the bus pulled up to the Grand Regency Hotel, the downpour had turned into a steady drizzle. I stepped off onto the curb, carefully hoisting my damp hem. Up ahead, the hotel's grand entrance was bathed in warm golden light, where valet attendants hustled to open doors for a parade of shining luxury sedans. Right on cue, a roaring engine cut through the evening air. Lauren's brand-new crimson Porsche pulled up to the main carpet with a screech of tires. The valet hurried over, opening the passenger door for Richard, who adjusted his tuxedo jacket, while Lauren stepped out from the driver's side, holding her key fob high enough for the nearby photographers to see. As they walked toward the glass doors, Richard's eyes swept over the entrance and landed directly on me. He stopped in his tracks, a smirk spreading across his face. "Well, look at that," Richard said, his voice loud enough for several nearby executives to hear. "She actually survived the bus. I half expected you to turn around and go home, Olivia. You look like a drowned rat." "I hope you kept your ticket stub as a souvenir," Lauren added, laughing as she brushed a speck of dust from her designer wrap. It's probably the closest thing to an executive pass you'll ever hold. I offered them a calm, polite smile. Enjoy the evening, Richard. Lauren. Without waiting for their reply, I walked past them toward the velvet ropes. While Richard and Lauren joined the massive line for general registration, I approached the security checkpoint near the side doors. The guard checked my ID, and his expression immediately changed. Ms. Bennett, they're expecting you. He opened the velvet barrier and stepped aside. The keynote team is already waiting. I walked through without saying another word. Behind me, I heard Lauren ask, "Why did he let her in?" For the first time that evening, my father didn't have an answer. The grand ballroom was bathed in soft amber spotlights, filled with over 500 of the region's most prominent corporate leaders, investors, and industry executives. From my vantage point near the curtain, I could easily spot my father and sister sitting at a prominent table near the front. Richard was nodding pompously at nearby business associates, while Lauren placed her new Porsche key fob right on top of her dinner napkin, making sure everyone took notice. Suddenly, the house lights dimmed, and the deep voice of the host echoed through the room's sound system. The crowd quieted down instantly as he stepped up to the podium. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," the host began. "Tonight, we honor a move that redefines our entire regional economy, a historic $90 million acquisition of the Apex Auto Group, encompassing 42 luxury dealerships across 3 counties. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I watched Richard lean forward, trying to figure out who could possibly pull off such a massive deal. "The buyer is only 34 years old," the host continued. Richard shifted in his seat, frowning slightly. "She built her company without inherited capital." Lauren stopped playing with her phone. She operated almost entirely outside the public eye, scaling quietly until her enterprise was large enough to execute a complete buyout of the state's largest auto network. My father's smug smile completely disappeared. And this morning, the final documents were signed, transferring ownership of Apex Auto Group to her parent company. The room erupted into applause. Richard looked around, bewildered, trying to make sense of the clues. Then the host looked toward the backstage curtain. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome one of the region's youngest CEOs, Olivia Bennett." The spotlights swiveled instantly, pinning me in their beam as I stepped out from behind the curtain. The audience gasped, and at table 4, Richard's face drained of all color. I walked down the center aisle toward the stage, taking my time. As I stepped up to the podium, the host smiled broadly and leaned back into his microphone. And for one amusing coincidence, the host chuckled softly. One of the luxury vehicles delivered through Apex's main floor just this morning was a crimson Porsche 911. A few people in the audience laughed polite dinner party laughs. I looked directly down from the stage, locking eyes with my father. "Apparently," the host continued, "the buyer was very proud of that purchase." Richard slowly looked down at the key fob resting on his cloth napkin. His hand began to tremble. He may be even more surprised to learn who owns the dealership that sold it, and who finalized that paperwork at 8 a.m. The host paused. The silence stretched across the ballroom. I stepped up to the microphone, looking straight at Richard and Lauren. "6 hours ago, my father told me to take the bus because he believed I didn't have a real career," I said into the mic, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "He believed that real success is inherited or bought through flashy shortcuts. But true power isn't given. It's built in silence, brick by brick, while everyone else is busy looking down on you. I didn't need a ride to this gala today, because I already own the road." The moment the official ceremony concluded, I stepped down from the stage. Wealthy investors lined up to shake my hand, but as the main crowd began to thin, Richard and Lauren pushed their way through the throng toward me. Richard looked completely shaken, but he immediately tried to adjust his posture. "You should have told me, Olivia," he said, his tone tight. Why? I asked, folding my arms. Because I'm your father. I almost laughed. No, Dad. You want me to be your daughter now because you finally discovered what I own. Richard opened his mouth to argue, but Lauren suddenly stepped in front of him. Her face was pale, and the smugness she had carried all morning was completely gone. Dad didn't buy the Porsche because he could afford it, Lauren blurted out, her voice trembling as she looked at me. He needed investors to believe the company was still doing well. The truth hung in the air between us. My father hadn't handed Lauren the keys out of love or respect. He had used her as a prop in a desperate, failing illusion. And he had shoved me onto a bus because my presence reminded him of everything he couldn't control. Olivia, please, Lauren whispered. If you don't help us secure a line of credit through your new group, Dad's firm goes into receivership on Monday. I looked at my father, whose jaw was set in a tight, proud line, even in total ruin. My answer is no, I said quietly. You spent my entire life treating me like an embarrassment while hiding behind cheap appearances. Now, you'll have to face the reality you built. Do not contact my office again. 6 months later, I walked out of my oceanfront office building into the late afternoon fog. The cool breeze carried the familiar smell of salt water. As I walked toward the parking area, a city transit bus pulled up to the curb nearby, its doors opening with a loud hiss of compressed air. I stopped and watched the passengers step out onto the sidewalk. I remembered my father standing in the kitchen that morning, looking down his nose at me and saying, "Take the bus, it builds character." I smiled to myself as the bus pulled away into traffic. He had been right about one thing. The bus had built character. It taught me that I could survive humiliation without letting it shrink me. It taught me that I didn't need a luxury car or a title handed down by an arrogant man to prove my worth. And most importantly, it taught me that the person sitting quietly on that bus could be building an empire while everyone else was judging her from a limousine. My father thought that morning was the day he put me in my place. He was wrong. It was the day I finally stopped caring where he thought I belonged.